What up? What's up, everybody? How's everyone doing? Man, good day to be alive. Almost 10 p.m. here. Wednesday, another hump day, get some true crime action. Pretty excited about it. I had a lot of fun the other night doing the Jeffrey Dahmer live stream. It was cool to get back into some true crime. So I think we'll do that tonight. I don't know if you guys saw my community post. There was some recent activity going on in the Chelsea Small case. My friend the Inquisitor came across some crazy information, but that reminded me of the last live stream that I did on the Chelsea Small case. I read the transcript of the Unsolved Mysteries podcast. They do like investigative journalism. It's not Robert Stack, it's some other guy, but it's really good. So I might go ahead and do that again tonight. This case is pretty crazy. It's a double murder of an elderly couple, and police held back a lot of information. It actually seemed like it was solved and they know who they were dealing with. But little by little, as the years passed, they released more information, and it just turns out to be a really strange and bizarre crime. So let's see how... I think we can start by watching some of those early news videos that came out here. Let's see. Investigation continues into couple slaying.
Whoever killed a Florence couple is still on the loose tonight. That couple murdered in their own home, and we actually met them as part of a different story in the past. Newside's Brian Hamrick is live tonight with more. Brian?
Well, Cherie, I met Bill back in 2000 when I was doing a story about the Truckers' Chapel, an effort he was spearheading. You'll learn more about him whenever you see part of that interview and what people who knew the couple best are saying. Bill and Peggy Stephenson were so close to many who knew them, the word friend didn't seem to fit.
I feel that way.
Yeah.
That I've lost a daughter.
Mary Bell No is one of them.
I am still in shock. I'm just beginning, I think, to realize what's happened.
The community and investigators are still trying to figure out why anyone would want to murder the couple, best known for helping other people and their work at church, members of Union Baptist.
And you run the gamut of emotions from, just grieving to anger that this person will be caught and brought to justice. And everybody's dealing with the same thing.
We met Bill Stephenson in November of 2000.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to TA in Florence, Kentucky. Hey, we're having chapel service over in the trailer if you want to join us.
The way of the cross leads home.
That's Peggy in the purple. This is the Truckers' Chapel at the TA truck stop in Florence. The Stevensons and a group of volunteers turned this trailer into a truckers' church. It was one of Bill's favorite projects.
Amen. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Thank you, Bill.
If you're willing to go, God will give you a place to go.
They left behind a legacy of helping other people, and for now, a mystery as to who and why anyone would want to put an end to it.
They were such wonderful people. You just can't, as I say, you can't imagine anybody wanting to harm them in any way.
Still lots of questions out there. Bill remained a key person at that Truckers' Chapel even to this his final days. Still no ID on any suspects out there. Reporting live, Brian Hamrick, News 5.
Man, isn't that kind of crazy? We're going to get into a lot of that, and that's what I meant by as details were being released, it got so weird. The lead investigator said there wasn't a single room in their home that wasn't staged. Kind of interesting. Speaking of, let me go ahead and I'm going to start this. Give me 1 second. I'm going to start this YouTube poll. I know there's not that much of you guys in here, but when we finally get to it in like an hour, I want you guys to help me choose what we're going to do. Because like I said, I might read the transcript of that Unsolved Mysteries episode, but also we might be able to listen to a podcast that had the detective in it. So I'm going to ask you guys what you want to do. Give me a minute. All right. Uh-oh, I don't have enough crap. Darn it. Here, I have to shorten it. Podcast with the detective. The answers have to be short. Okay. There we go. Do I have to add another option? Why won't it let me do it? For some reason. Alright. Okay. Darn it. Yeah, this sucks. Okay. I'm just gonna get... Okay. That's the question. Okay. Let's go on to another early news station that was on the news. Let's see. Neighbors wait for answers in couple's murder. 2011, by the way, late 2011.
Now to a story that many of you continue to ask us about. 6 weeks ago in northern Kentucky, husband and wife were killed in their home. But the police are being extremely tight-lipped on this one.
And tonight we have found out some neighbors are so concerned they've moved out. Here's Laura Borchers with the story.
I didn't hear anything, see anything, but my dog was acting very, very, very suspicious.
Good boy.
Nicole Farr unlocked her door May 29th and took her dog out.
What is it?
He always goes down to the back and does his business. And then he started coming back up and just growling and wanting to go back down there. And then he'd run in the house and run to the back deck and back outside. And like there was something just definitely not right out there.
Now she fears that barking should have alerted her to a suspicious person behind her home.
Dang. Isn't that weird? Kind of like how, I don't know if you think that's paranormal. I don't know if you'd consider it that, but how dogs and even babies sometimes, kids, they have like this sixth sense where they can sense something going on. Dogs also have incredible hearing, though. He could have maybe heard what was going on down the street, but that's crazy that the dog was getting all crazy as this crime was happening. Diggs on Twitch, what's up, man? Good to see you. Good to see you, Katie. Thank you for coming in today. Hope everybody's doing really good. We're just getting started, so you haven't missed anything. Just going over this double murder case. It's about, I don't know, a little over 10 years old.
The next day she learned her neighbors, Bill and Peggy Stephenson, were found dead on the floor of their condo.
They were such wonderful people. You just can't, as I say, you can't imagine anybody wanting to harm them in any way.
The couple was best known for giving with their church and volunteering on their own.
There's a couple couples that have moved out.
The Stephensons' condo building once held several families. Now neighbors say just one.
Oh, I would love for their family members to know that everybody in the community is praying for them, hoping that there's a resolution soon, and all the people that they helped will find some peace in how they've been helped.
So that was something that they mentioned. They opened a chapel. They were, I think they were Christian Baptists or whatever you call it. But either way, they were people of God, and they would always help people. Kind of makes the suspect pool a lot larger when you're constantly giving to people in need and, helping random people with their lives. So it's really strange. So right now, I'm going to read a quick art. This is going to sum up kind of the case because we haven't talked about the case yet. Though this is from Reddit, this is copy and pasted from the Ohio newspaper. So all of this is verbatim what was on a newspaper. I just choose to use the Reddit because it's the way it's structured is easier to read, and there's comments in there that are nice to hear from other people. So as you can see, Cincinnati.com, they're the ones who released this, and they had the same title called Backstory. Bill and Peggy Stephenson's bizarre crime scene included posed bodies, staged items, and an undisclosed message from the killer. Hi all, this case was highlighted recently in my weekly cold case column in a movie script. It's a movie script in the making. No disrespect intended, it's just genuinely one of the strangest crime scenes I've ever written about. If you're able, please hop on over to the original link and read so my bosses can see that people care about cold cases. Great. For the families of victims killed in unsolved murders, life has been at a standstill for a long time, even before the pandemic arrived. Over the next several weeks, the Inquirer will highlight a series of cold cases, summarized and analyzed by the journalists whose careers largely focus on unsolved murders, the creators of Cincinnati.com's Accused podcast. If you have any information on any unsolved case, please reach out to the appropriate law enforcement agency. So here they break it down by categories. The crime. Bill and Peggy Stephenson were two halves of a loving elderly couple known in Florence, Kentucky, for their church work and generosity. Bill had founded the Truckers' Chapel Ministry, a spot where traveling transporters could gather and pray. Peggy played organ at Union Baptist Church. They led quiet but impactful lives, according to their loved ones, which made the disturbing crime scene police discovered in May 2011 all the more unfathomable. On May 29, 2011, the Stephensons were slain in brutal fashion, bludgeoned and stabbed, and then whoever killed them staged a bizarre scene. Detective Coy Cox, who's headed the Boone County Sheriff's investigation since day one, told me that he's been guarded and careful about the details he's released from the start. What he will say is that the bodies had been posed. Items inside the house have been moved around. In quotes, there wasn't one room in the house that wasn't staged. And that's what he said on Just the Tipsters podcast. That's the podcast that's in the poll question tonight. Over the years, bits and pieces of information about the confounding crime have trickled out of investigators, though they keep certain details under wraps. For example, they'll only publicly say that the deaths occurred sometime between 1 and 4 in the morning, May 29th. But Cox says that they have the precise time of deaths thanks to a medical device implanted in one of the victims, probably a pacemaker or something. The scene. Investigators have long believed that whoever killed the Stephensons knew them. This is based on a few things. There was no sign of forced entry at their condo, and the couple would have had to buzz in any visitors. Neighbors were situated quite close, yet reported nothing out of the ordinary. The killer or killers also seemed comfortable in the environment, staying hours after the couple was killed to inflict a post-mortem injury on one of them and stage the scene. There was also a message left by the killer or killers, Cox said, though he won't share details. Not cold. And this is posted, I think, 2 years ago. Cox said that he and his team has visited more than a dozen states working on the case. Because Bill Stephenson had so much contact with truckers passing through town, a number of tips have related to people living hundreds of miles away. Cox has conferred with a psychic hoping for a breakthrough, and has taken the case to Vido CQ Society, which accused listeners will recognize from Season 1 as the volunteer group of professionals who gather in Philadelphia monthly to give insight into cold cases. Cox is quick to correct that this case isn't cold, though. It's old, he said. So he said it's not cold, it's old. Okay, the nephew. As Morgan said in her podcast, a lot of people assumed the killer in the case had been found when one of the Stephensons' nephews was arrested in connection with another murder. Charles Stevie Stephenson was convicted in 2012 of beating 67-year-old Lee Jennings of Indiana to death with a skillet and pepper grinder. Stephenson was sentenced in 2013 to life without parole. Wow, that seems coincidental, doesn't it? The nephew of the couple beating to death a 70-year-old. Okay. It's understandable people assumed a connection. After all, what are the odds? But Bill Stephenson was one of 14 kids, so the odds are a bit higher than average. It turns out that police have DNA evidence that they believe came from the killer or killers, and it doesn't match the nephews. He is not a suspect in this case. The motive. Motive isn't always easy to spot in the most straightforward of murder cases, and this is anything but. Cox said the easy-to-fence items robbers steal were left untouched. Photos were arranged to suggest the killers liked certain people and disliked others, but it all feels scripted. So you imagine maybe there's a picture of the family and he scratches out the face of one of the family members. Like, it's really kind of a fucked up staging here. In quotes, there's a lot about this scene that you wouldn't believe. One thing Cox is certain of is this: they both had to die, he said. If only one half of the couple had been targeted, there was ample opportunity to attack each alone. It would also have been fairly easy to overpower and restrain either 74-year-old so that the killer or killers could harm one while sparing the other. Sorry. Here's the obvious question. For anyone who follows crime, the first thing likely comes to mind when law enforcement has DNA is have investigators uploaded the profile into a database such as GEDmatch, where people voluntarily submit their DNA. That's how the long-elusive Golden State Killer was identified 2 years ago as Joseph James DeAngelo, a man who since pleaded guilty to a string of horrific rapes and homicides in the 70s and 80s. I asked this of Cox, in quotes, "The DNA is not suitable for genealogy or phenotyping at this time," he said. "We hope in the future that changes." This could imply a few things, including that the DNA is from more than one person, either mixed or not enough, kind of like the Delphi case you guys know. What should happen? In this case, what should happen is actually what is happening. Cox not only gave that podcast interview recently, but he's also appeared on a radio show and responded to me within minutes when I reached out. He skips no chance at spreading the word about this case because he said he's sure that someone out there has the info he needs. This one's not going to get unsolved, he says. So I'm going to keep that open because we may go to the comment section a little bit later, see what those people are saying. Pretty interesting. Law enforcement won't even say if it's male or female. So let's watch this press conference that came out right after those two. We already watched those two news videos. That was late 2011. This is the first, and I think the only press conference, and it happened in 2012. And I think in this press conference, they say something like, "We know who the killer is, we just don't know his name." So to be unsolved more than 10 years later, it's just kind of really interesting and weird.
Good morning. We stand before you today in disbelief that it has been 15 months since our lives were changed in an instant when our parents, two of the most loving and caring people God ever created, were brutally and senselessly murdered. Tom, Beth, and I lost the most wonderful parents anyone could ever hope to have. Our children lost their mama and papa who loved each of them with all their hearts. There's not a minute that goes by that we're not brokenhearted and miss them beyond description. The person responsible for their murders has lived in the shadows, hiding for the past 15 months. They believe they have succeeded in getting away with murder. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Because of the meticulous work of the Boone County Sheriff's Department and the experts at the Kentucky Crime Lab, we now know who you are genetically, and it's just a matter of time until we find you. The pain and heartache you have caused our family cannot be measured. Because of our undying love for our parents, we are stronger and more united than ever. We will never stop looking for you. One day, we will stand face to face in a courtroom, and you will face justice for the despicable, cowardly act you committed against our family. We would like to thank the Boone County Sheriff's Department, the Boone County Commonwealth Attorney's Office, the Kentucky Crime Lab, and the FBI. All have worked endless hours to help solve this extremely complex and difficult case. We pray daily for them to receive God's strength and guidance as this case moves forward. Thanks to the generosity of family and friends, today we would like to announce that a reward of $100,000 is being offered by our family for information leading to an arrest. However, this is not an open-ended reward and will expire in 90 days on November the 30th, 2012. The number to call...
Damn, $100,000 reward, but only 90 days to do it. Dang.
If you have information or would like to leave a tip, is 859...
Good to see you, Burf.
8496. 859-334-8496. In conjunction with the reward, we will be hanging several large banners along I-75 in Boone County. Once they are up, Tom Shaban will notify you of their locations. We thank all those who have lifted up our family in prayer, and we ask that you continue to do so until justice has been served. Thank you.
As you just heard from Doug, during the commission of the murders, the killer left his DNA in separate locations inside the home here. We owe a special thanks to the Kentucky State Police lab technicians who found that proverbial needles in a haystack for us.
So, it's just kind of weird. I don't know why. They've mentioned that they have DNA and they know who this is genetically already. I just, I don't know. Kind of weird. If they don't have enough to do any kind of phenotyping or to run through GEDmatch, they sure did make some big statements about DNA, though. They won't say what type or how much or, obviously not a great sample, though, if they can't test it 10 years later.
While I cannot elaborate further on how it was found,
Good to see you, Betty.
or
Thank
where
you
it
for
was
coming.
located or what type of DNA it is, I can tell you that it was where it was discovered, it could only come from one person, and that person is the murderer. That DNA profile has been entered into the combined DNA index.
And this could be... Can somebody define for me what a Freudian slip is? Because I'm not going to use that term. I don't think it's the right thing. But right here, he does say the DNA does belong to the killer. It's not really plural. He mentions multiple DNA, but that it was in multiple spots, but he doesn't say multiple people here.
It could only come from one person, and that person is the murderer.
It could only come from one person, and that person is the murderer, he says. Okay.
That DNA profile has been entered into the combined DNA index system, otherwise known as CODIS. It's with the FBI. While there have been no matches yet, these DNA profiles are continually being compared.
You can bet that aside from sharing the DNA with CODIS, they probably shared all of the details with VICAP. If you guys don't know what VICAP is, it's where in all kinds of unsolved cases, missing persons and murders, they'll share details around the states, for people who have similar MOs and connections in other crimes. So they said that this has led them to 6 different states, and knowing that both of the victims led like a trucker chapel. They were used to conversing with people, strangers from all around the states. So this got to be a little weird. But they did also say the person who did this must have known them. I don't know.
Additionally, we're releasing a narrowed down time.
Oh, and thank you guys too. So the Freudian slip means it's when you say what's on your mind, but you didn't intend to say those words. Oh, okay. Okay. So it could have been, but not really. I see what you're saying. Okay. And it doesn't have to be on purpose. It can be well, no, because it's a slip. That's why. Yeah, it's just something you accidentally do. Okay.
Timeline of when these murders happened, and that's between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. again on Sunday, May 29th, 2011, right here. Through witness accounts and medical documentation, we actually have a precise time of when it happened. We're opting to withhold that right now in interest of the investigation. We know someone spent a considerable amount of time in that home after the deaths, arranging the crime scene in such a manner it can only be is unique. That's the only way we could describe it. Unique. While I cannot be more specific concerning the aforementioned, I want to impress upon the Boone County community, our stakeholders, that we are conducting a painstaking investigation and we continue to narrow our scope. To the murderer, I say, we now have your genetic profile. This is an identification that you can't alter or change, and it is by far the best evidence that we could ever hope to have at this point. With the announcement of the substantial increase in the reward from the Stephensons, as Doug told you, we've set up a dedicated phone line, again, 859-334-8496, and created a page on our website, www.boonecountyky.org/SO.
And just in case, that was the tip line to the reward that expired in 90 days. The current tip line should be there on the bottom. Well, still the same. That tip line is old, by the way. It's from the beginning, but it's the original one. The special one on the screen isn't the one.
For those interested in following the case and providing tips. Our goal today, between the increase and the reward and the banners and the information we're sharing with you today, is we're hoping to jar somebody's memory. We're hoping that you remember back and something about what somebody said was suspicious, that they couldn't account for their time, that maybe they were injured. Maybe that's how the DNA was left. Maybe it was a nick or a cut. Maybe it was a scratch. We're looking for the public's help in catching a killer and putting...
Yeah, almost like some of that DNA might have come, from defensive wounds. You don't really think, anything... they were 74 years old, so... And they made a lot of big statements about DNA in this conference, so it's weird 10 years later we can't do anything with it.
Putting him behind bars and giving these people right here some relief. Questions?
Have you checked with the local hospitals to find out if the DNA could possibly be a match or anything to any particular person if you think maybe he got cut or injured?
No. Not to my knowledge, we haven't.
Have you solicited DNA from anybody in the course of the investigation?
We have.
Has anybody denied the request for DNA?
Not to my knowledge.
So those submissions do not match the killer?
Correct.
The FBI given any indication that they found that DNA at other crime scenes?
No, just the opposite, as a matter of fact. There have been no matches thus far.
Yeah, volume's all the way up, and the subtitles aren't picking up the questions. They asked if anybody refused to give DNA. The answer was no. And then the follow-up question was, okay, so everyone who gave DNA doesn't match. So he said, yes, the people who gave DNA so far don't match. They asked if there was any connections to the DNA being at other scenes, and he said, to my knowledge, no. I think there was another question in there, but I'll repeat them as they go.
You say you've entered it into the FBI system. Did that just happen, or you did it and they've checked and have come up with nothing yet?
It's happened, they've checked, and we've come up with nothing yet, correct.
So there was they're saying the FBI has checked in their system of CODIS. They didn't find anything. And I don't know, maybe even VICAP, but they didn't even mention that.
Check the DNA of Charles Robert Stephenson.
We have.
Does that match with the DNA that you found?
Obviously, no.
They're asking about Charles Robert Stephenson, kind of insinuating that he would have been a suspect, maybe a family member. Obviously, they have the same last names, but here he is saying no, they don't match.
Is he no longer a suspect then?
I don't know. We never did identify him as a suspect.
Okay, so they were asking, was he ever that family member? Is he still a suspect? Kind of a trick question, but he caught it and he said we never did identify him as a suspect.
Anything else?
Can you say now he's not a suspect?
I can tell you that's not his DNA.
No, I think that's a different nephew. The different nephew, and the different nephew didn't commit his crime until 2017, I think. We'll have to go check on that.
As soon as they provide them to me, I'll provide them to you. There's a good chance.
2012, thank you, Lotus. Really? Okay, so if the nephew committed that crime in 2012, then I can see why they would, why they would say that. But the guy's middle name that committed the murder on the other older lady in Indiana, his middle name was Stevie. So that middle name didn't match.
Any possibility of going back to some of the people you interviewed previously and getting their DNA, or is that probably a constitutional violation or something?
It wouldn't be a constitutional violation if they willingly gave it to us. Let's just suppose that's already happened.
So again, nobody refused to give DNA, he said.
You've already gone back to those people that you previously interviewed as people of interest and checked their DNA?
Or in the course of the investigation, gotten it when we interviewed them.
So they've been ruled out as well, all the people, persons of interest, quote unquote, previously?
No, I'm not saying that, because we continue to send evidence to the lab of evidence that we collected at the crime scene. Consider this, I guess, if you will.
Have they released a potential motive? Yeah, good question. No, they haven't. And one thing that we're going to pull up, what is it called? I got a case study. It's called Crime Scene Staging and Its Detection. And that's one thing that they talk about is when you have a staged scene, you look for two things. You look for the underlying motive, and that usually just brings you straight to the suspect. But the evidence of staging is usually to throw somebody off. Here, let me read it because I'm not doing it justice. It says, let's see. Determining the motive is one of the key issues to be resolved in any criminal investigation. In staged crimes, learning the motive will more often than not lead to the person responsible. We suggest that in every staged crime, the investigator is confronted with determining the motive for two different behaviors. A, the original act that necessitated the staging, which would be homicide in this case, and then B, the staging itself. So that's what I was trying to say, didn't do it. But we're going to read that case study there. And good question, Tessie. Yeah, that probably could have been the nephew that they were referring to, because Stevie does sound kind of like a nickname. I only remembered that because Stevie Stephenson, kind of. I think you're right. And yeah, truck stop ministries, so many strangers would come in and out of your life, I bet. I wonder how many people he actually led to their home, or people that stalked him to his home to find out where they lived. Because it suggested they must have knew him. I don't know how well, but...
There's a bunch of evidence at the crime scene. We send down what between our detectives and their lab techs, what we think might have the best chance of getting evidence. And once they either get evidence or rule it out, then we send more. So we're still in the process of sending more and comparing more.
Is there any indication more than one person was involved in this crime?
No, but I'll tell you this, we're not sold that there wasn't.
So there's no indication that there was more than one person, but they're not sold that it wasn't. So everything's on the table as far as one or two people, male or female even, like you pointed out.
When you say this scene is unique, I know you can't elaborate on it either. Can you elaborate it a little bit more as far as unique? Maybe that triggers somebody's memory around here.
He's asking him to elaborate a little bit more on what he meant by being so unique.
Did the guy remove anything, take it outside or anything like that somebody perhaps around here might have seen?
I'd love to elaborate on that, but there are certain things that we've decided and we've discussed it at length that we just cannot tell, because he knows this and we know this, and it's not going to behoove us for the community to know this, and we hope that they understand that, and we trust that they do.
Can you say any more? You said it happens between 1 and 4 a.m. Can you say any more about how the suspect got in and what the scenario was surrounding how he got access to that house?
No.
Is there any indication that Mr. Stevenson he had a long range, he visited folks all over the country and came in contact with people from all over the country at the truck stop and everything. Is there any indication of where this person might be at all, whether they might be a local person, someone from out of state? Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Brian, I think you just answered your own question. We've been in how many states?
We've been in 14 states.
14 states.
More than 200.
14 states?
And interviewed more than 250 people.
Interviewed more than 250 people.
Yes, his work was far-reached.
No sense of a motive?
Asking about the motive, he says no.
Are you any closer to making an arrest today than you were in May of last year?
Yes and no. Yes, in that we know who this person is genetically, and it's a matter of time. We're comfortable with that, but no.
So they're comfortable with knowing him genetically. It's just going to take some time. 2022, 10 years later, DNA must not have been that strong.
Oh, as far as actually pointing a finger and saying it's Joe Webb.
I know this is emotional for the lead detectives who've been on this for so long. I wonder, when was it that moment came you realized you had a match or a genetic profile, and what the reaction was from the detectives?
Coy?
This is Detective Coy
Detective Matt Mullins,
on that
also the
podcast.
lead on this case, and has done the lion's share of the work, a lot of the heavy lifting. And I can tell you, he called me to let me know that happened, and he was ecstatic. It's not a matter of if and when anymore. It's a matter of when. We now have his genetic identification, and what that means is, in a lot of cases, as a detective, you may know who did a crime, but never be able to prove it. We have something much better than that now. We can prove who did our crime. It's just a matter of when we put his name on a warrant and we arrest him, and that will happen.
So, you guys see kind of what I mean? Like, they say it's just a matter of when we put his name on the paper, and
We have something much better than that now. We can prove who did our crime. It's just a matter of when we put his name on a warrant and we arrest him, and
that's just a little, I don't know if you're saying that to make the killer nervous or they actually feel at the time that they know who did it. Wonder about that. James, welcome. Hope you're having a good one. Lotus says, I think it's the nephew. People who resolve conflict with murder are high on the suspect list, like the nephew. Just a few more minutes left here of this, and it looks like Coy's going to finish it off.
that will happen. The commitment of the sheriff, the Commonwealth attorney, the lab, the detectives that aren't here today that are out working on things that have to do with this case as well, the deputies that you see sitting around, everyone is more committed at this moment than they were the week after it happened. And it's very comforting for us to know that we're working with those group of people who are committed and are going forward, and we will put that name on that warrant, and this person will be caught and they will be arrested.
But what if this person, this is the only crime they've ever committed, there's no DNA match in the system or ever will be?
One of the things that Mr. Shaben stayed away from is the fact that there are other databases. There's other places where DNA is kept, and we're not going to discuss that, but there are offline searches that will occur and have been occurring and will continue to occur.
See, that answer just, compared to the answer that was just given, the follow-up it's not really good enough. It doesn't really make sense, and I don't mean to be disrespectful towards law enforcement, but if you're saying it's not a matter of proving it, it's a matter of when we're going to put his name on the warrant and go get him. Then that question was, well, have you got his DNA? Did you go to that person, get their DNA? And instead he answers by saying, well, there's other avenues we can take, other program. It just, yeah, that was a really weird statement, huh? Very kind of strange.
So this individual has to be careful not to make any mistakes in a lot of different areas, not just in the fact that he may be arrested for a crime that gets him put into the system somewhere in the penal system, but he can't make any mistakes to where his DNA would come up to any place where it would.
And that's absolutely ridiculous. If they know who they did it, go and ask him for his DNA. Because obviously they just answered, yeah, they might be able to lie, but they said nobody refused DNA. They questioned if this person never got arrested before and he wasn't in the system, well, he better just not make any mistakes. We better hope he doesn't do it again. No, go compare his damn DNA. It does kind of sound like they have a crappy genealogist, huh?
Would be compared to this system, but those are offline searches, and those go along with the normal searches that are being done each and every day with the CODIS system that Mr. Shaban had mentioned to you.
Obviously,
Yes, ma'am. It's COY, and the last name is COX. And Detective Mullins is M-A-T-T, that's Matt, obviously, and Mullins is M-U-L-L-I-N-S.
Coy, you keep referring to this DNA match as him. Can you say for a fact that it is a male?
Please quote me on this. That was a gender mistake. I should not have made it gender specific. This person, we are keeping that open.
Wow. Lotus, what you said was really strange, huh? So Coy has said him a couple of times, and they really made... Do you see that confused look by... I don't know if that's a family member behind them or another member of law enforcement. He's like, what the fuck did he just say? Let's play that back just a minute.
Can you say for a fact that...
So the question was, you keep referring to the DNA matches as him. Can you say for a fact it's a male?
It is a male.
Please quote me on this. That was a gender mistake. I should not have made it gender specific.
A gender mistake?
We are keeping that open. This person.
The DNA would tell you if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, what the hell's the matter with you? If you have DNA, you can tell if it's a man, woman, what race, all kinds of shit. What do you mean it was a gender mistake? I should not have called him a male. Yeah, the guy in the background, he's like, what the hell is going on here? Confusing me.
It would also tell you if they were a Caucasian or American. Can you share any of that information with us that might help somebody who might have seen something around here?
I cannot, nor can I confirm that what you said was true, that it can be confirmed with gender.
Just plain old simple fingerprints.
Yeah, what the dude, this press conference got a little weird on us.
We are not going to make comments about fingerprints. I think Deputy Shaban has said it best. There was a lot of evidence inside this site, and that has been collected, but we're not going to make specific comments on that.
Okay, you can't tell race from DNA. I didn't know that. I thought it tells you, like, percentage, like your roots, like European Wait, that's not race, is it? Does it? What does it tell? Doesn't it say, like, countries or something that you're akin to? He backpedaled the hell out of that one. Did they say what type of DNA was found? No, that's not a stupid question. They didn't say, no. Obviously, it's either mixed or not good enough, contaminated, overly tested. There's something wrong to where they're not doing anything about it right now. But they were so what do you call it? So confident back then. Okay, what region you're from, but doesn't say what race. Okay. Yeah, I never did one of those tests. I want to, though. I'd like to see where I'm from. Okie doke.
You say that if he makes any mistake, not just with the penal system or anything like that, that you're going to catch him. You got to be concerned in the back of your mind that he doesn't make any more mistakes, or he or she.
Well, some of the offline stuff that's going on right now, we feel really good about that. We feel confident about that. I don't believe that and I don't know if you've noticed, but I hope that you do, the family behind us has worked probably harder than any detective. They're praying for us every day, without a doubt. There are hundreds of people that when he and I wake up, and the other deputies and detectives on this department, they're praying for him every day. I wouldn't want to be this person because I just don't think that's going to happen. Is it possible? Anything's possible.
Do you have enough evidence that when you get a DNA match,
For those of you guys that didn't hear that question that was just asked, the reporter said, are you, in the back of your mind, are you worried if this suspect doesn't make any more mistakes? Because that's how they said he was going to get caught and his DNA put in. All they have to do is ask him. Freaking follow him around and get his cup or something. It's weird.
Yes, sir.
Aside from the DNA, has there been any matches to any similar crime scenes? You said it was very unique. Has the FBI matched it to any other unsolved crimes?
We can't comment too far on that, other than to say that part of our trips out of state had to do with just that situation. And don't take that any further than what I just said.
I'm going to take it further than what you just said. And the guy behind you was like cringing. And why are you saying that? She asked if there was any similarities in the crimes to other crimes, if there was any connections, signatures, all that stuff. He said, I'm not going to answer that, but I will say that's why our investigation led to many different states. So obviously they either got some hits on VICAP, or they just sought other similar crimes with the staging, the posing, if there is an MO that they found, the MO is probably similar. That guy behind him is just so pissed. Or maybe at this point he's amused, I don't know. Man, I think that's true. Race isn't scientific. Like, can you... white Caucasian. Do you know how many different countries and continents a white person could be from? Or just to label somebody black when they're like dark skinned, they could be from anywhere. Yeah, it's making me think a little bit. Are the public still at risk? That's a good question. I wish they answered that.
Meaning, don't take that any further than what I just said.
Were you the lead detective on the Michelle Motley case?
I was not, no, sir.
Wow. Okay, so that was the presser. We're going to go right into a couple of the news, more of the news that came out. I think some details come out, either a raise and reward, or they try to keep the story out there. Got a couple of them here.
DNA in the deaths of Bill and Peggy Stephenson. DNA in the deaths of Bill and Peggy Stephenson, and it's not who most people think.
Yeah, we are also learning some new information tonight about the crime scene, too. Now, Newslive's Brian Hamrick has been out in front of this story since the very beginning. He joins us live tonight with the very latest developments for us. Brian?
Yeah, Cherie, well, they now have the genetic fingerprint that investigators are convinced belongs to the killer. What they do not have is a person that matches that DNA profile. Meanwhile, what happened here in this condo all seems like yesterday for the family of the victims.
We stand before you today in disbelief that it has been 15 months since our lives were changed in an instant.
More than a year since both of his parents were murdered, and Doug Stephenson still struggles to talk about it.
When our parents, two of the most loving and caring people God ever created, were brutally and senselessly murdered.
Along with his brother, sister, and other family.
Wow, that was the son who was behind him. Oh, and he was shaking his head, talking even about how it led them to different states. Like, he really didn't want information to get out, the family member.
Family members, they stood outside the murder scene as investigators announced that they're a key step closer to putting a name to the killer and then on a warrant.
It's not a matter of if and when anymore. It's a matter of when.
Coy Cox is one of the detectives working on the case. He says they now have the genetic profile of the killer, and while they wouldn't say exactly where they got it, they did say this.
Where it was discovered, it could only come from one person, and that person is the murderer.
Bill and Peggy Stephenson.
Where it came from, it could only have came from one person. That person's the murderer. What does that tell you about DNA? It tells you either defensive wound, that could come from a murderer. If they found the DNA inside somebody, sexual, that could come from the murderer. What do they mean? Because of where the DNA was found, it had to have been the killer, the person responsible. Interesting statement there.
Stephenson were murdered in their Oak Brook condo May 29, 2011, Memorial Day weekend. Investigators released new information saying it was between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. But more disturbing was this bizarre twist.
We know someone spent a considerable amount of time in that home after the deaths, arranging the crime scene in such a manner it can only be is unique.
Yeah, not a room in the house that wasn't staged in some way. Crazy markings, undisclosed messages from the killer. Telling you, very strange. And we're going to learn a little bit more about those details, I think, because compared to where we are in the timeline, we're still in 2012.
While the family had a new series of tractor-trailer-sized banners put up offering a $100,000 reward for anyone who could put a name with the DNA that could put a killer in prison. So what does all this mean for Steve Stephenson? You may remember he's the nephew of Bill and Peggy, the murder victims. He was never named as a suspect, but he was questioned in this case. He's now being held on a separate independent murder over in Indiana. When they were specifically asked about this, they say the DNA does not match his, but did it block his participation in this? They say no one has been ruled out.
That is really crazy, isn't it? Really crazy. That family member murdered another elderly person with a skillet and a pepper grinder. So yeah, so his name was Steve. Okay. So different family member, but still freaking interesting and crazy. Plot twist. Imagine if this crime were to happen today and how much rabbit holes there would be. Was their home secluded? No, it was it was suburban, but it wasn't secluded. No forced entry, that's right. They had to get buzzed to allow somebody in. Just like the Chelsea Small murder. Had to have got buzzed in. He does talk to the public just like ISP, doesn't he? That one guy that was on there, on the stand. Alright, let's see here. So we're jumping from 2012 to 2018. 2018 now. See what they're saying.
A 74-year-old couple described as caring and giving. People of God spreading the word of the Lord. So who would want them dead?
May 29, 2011, which was 7 years ago. That crime scene, of all the crime scenes I've been on, was the most unique by far.
Boone County Detective Coy Cox says this is an old case and not a cold case because he carries it with him every day.
I'm not a young guy, and I've made the comment to many people that the day this case is solved, I'll retire the next day. So yes, it would mean a lot.
7 years ago this month, Bill and Peggy Stephenson were found murdered in their Florence, Kentucky home. Years earlier, WLWT actually did a story on Bill in 2000. He was a deacon at a local church and oversaw the Truckers' Chapel on Kentucky 18, sharing his faith with men and women who spend most of their lives away from home and on the road.
Breaker 19. Hey guys, this is Truckers Christian Chapel.
We're going to have church service in here if you want to come on in and join us.
11 years after we shared this story on our news, Bill and his wife were brutally killed. Cause of death, stabbing, and blunt force trauma. But the crime scene is something investigators and federal experts are still scratching their heads about.
There were symbols, there were items that were used at the scene to indicate strong feelings or opinions about the victims, Bill and Peggy.
Symbols. Man, I'm going to break that back just a little bit.
Strong feelings or symbols. There were.
And federal experts are still scratching their heads about.
There were.
Also, I'll go on to say that in some articles it was explained as ritualistic, and the FBI had to come in and say no, it wasn't ritualistic. Isn't that weird, considering that Robert Ives called it non-secular and some of the statements made by Robert Ives were like redacted from the public. So I don't know if this is the same situation when people are kind of releasing too much information and getting it redacted or what, but it seems ritualistic to me, non-secular, the way that all this stuff is staged.
Symbols. There were items that were used at the scene to indicate strong feelings or opinions about the victims, Bill and Peggy.
Detective Cox says the evidence proves the killer or killers were either with the bodies for several hours or came back to the home long after the murders. No eyewitnesses, no murder weapon found. The home was cleaned, the bodies staged in a certain way.
So one thing that I've heard is because the medical device implanted in one of the victims, which was I think Peggy, they can tell that there was post-mortem stab wounds and grotesque stuff done to her 2 hours after she was dead. So if the scene is between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. and he post-mortemly injured her 2 hours later, that tells you that it couldn't have been before 2 in the morning that he got her, right? Because if he was there for 2 hours and then got her post-mortem, that rules out. And do you guys see what I'm trying to say? Hopefully you guys can explain what I'm trying to say. I'm bad at this sometimes.
Littered with odd...
Because the timeline was 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. So if she was attacked 2 hours after she died, there is a little bit of kind of a little weird window there where you can say some things.
Items. Cox won't call it a satanic ritual or sacrifice, but he does believe the killer was trying to communicate something. So tonight, the lead detective wants you, the person who did this, to get in touch anonymously, perhaps a letter with no return address, or a disposable burner cell phone. However you do it, Detective Cox is ready for you to reach out.
I realize that you're not going to come and sit down and say, hey, I did this, let me tell you what I did. But the why, I think, would be part of what you want us to know, part of the message that you were trying to get to us. And I would ask you to communicate. Well, we'll work with you. I'll communicate back to you in some kind of social form.
The tips keep coming in. Cox and fellow investigators have interviewed hundreds of people of interest. He says circumstantial evidence has narrowed down the search.
We do have, I'm going to say individuals, plural, at this time, that we have been keeping tabs on for 7 years.
Cox says he and his team...
Wow, they have people in their scope they've been tailing. Who is that? Who is he talking to? That's from Indiana. Who is he talking to in this news? That can't be Indiana, is it?
Are tightening the circle, constantly chatting with folks who have had dealings with these people of interest. He says someday that mistake will be made, and he'll get to tell Bill and Peggy's family a killer has been caught.
It may not be today, it may not be next month, may not be next year, maybe 10 years down the road. But this case will be solved.
How come people are so comfortable with saying stuff like that? Like it's going to take so much time type of stuff. Okay, how about jumping forward from 2018 to 2021? We're going to watch this and then I'll read a little bit of an article too. Title is, and this is from Fox 19, Investigators Revealing New Information as the 10-year anniversary of couple's murder approaches. Okay, that was from Kentucky. Yeah, a lot of the state police have the same uniform, huh? Didn't even have to be state police, because I thought that was Carroll County, not ISP. There we go.
Do you remember this couple? It's been nearly a decade since Bill and Peggy Stephenson were murdered inside their home in Boone County.
A detective working the couple's case is revealing a new information about the investigation.
Jessica Schmidt joins us live with where things stand right now. This is a story you will see only right here on Fox 19 Now.
Yeah, Robin, Amber, so Sunday actually marks 10 years since the Stephensons were murdered in the Boone County area. And I spoke with the detective who has handled the case tonight, and that detective told me it's not a cold case, even though time has passed. In fact, he actually says they have some solid leads that they got recently that they are continuing to follow up on.
10 years is long enough.
It's been a decade full of painful moments, cherished memories, and unanswered questions for the family of Bill and Peggy Stephenson.
They were open and friendly with everybody they met. You know, they didn't meet a stranger.
The Boone County couple died in May 2011 when they were brutally murdered inside their Florence home. The 74-year-olds were well known and well liked for their work in Christian ministry.
They were very involved with the church that they went to for years. Dad was a deacon, Mom played the organ.
Although time has passed, Detective Coy Cox says he and his partner are following up on 3 solid leads received within the past year. One of those tips led them to a truck driver.
So they've gotten 3 leads in the past year. They said this in 2021. All right. Excellent. It just becomes a little strange when we move on to 2022 and they say the same thing as if they've gotten a string of new tips by different people. Like, it's kind of weird.
A man who used to live in northern Kentucky but moved to California. Knowing Bill worked with a chapel ministry at a truck stop, they tracked that trucker down.
We have collected DNA from him, and that's been submitted to the state.
Although the crime scene was complex because some...
Right? Yep. Last year they took DNA from a truck driver that hung out where this dude who was murdered did the ministry, but don't know if the DNA is back. That's what I heard too. I don't know if they got that back. They didn't say anything. When they're asking for the suspect to contact them to tell them why, it sounds like they're trying to pick him into communicating. Oh, much like law enforcement did to BTK. Yeah, and they never disclosed what message he left them, because he left a message at the scene. I think that's true. I think people who do that, they do, they try to get him to come out a little bit.
Something had been moved and then staged in each room. Cox says they do have evidence, and at this point, they can't rule out that more than one person may have been involved.
Who could do this to them? Why them?
We have a pretty good idea of the persons that we are interested in.
Detectives aren't revealing possible motives, but Beth says she and her 2 brothers will never understand how someone could take their parents' lives so senselessly.
Are investigators not disclosing motives because they don't know, or because it would give it away? Do they know a motive?
In such a horrific way.
I think it's one of the hardest things that you can go through as a family. It's a nightmare that has gone on for 10 years.
They deserve an answer. I wish we could give them one, and hopefully soon we can.
Now, Detective Cox says he isn't sure exactly when they will get those DNA test results back, but did say it probably will take some time. Of course, we'll keep you posted on those. We also know tonight there is a $50,000 reward for information in this case. So on that note, Detective Cox says it is never too late to call and give them a tip. I mean, they just got one last year and it's already given them new leads. So
yeah, 2021 tip coming from last year makes that tip coming in 2020. DNA? I don't know, guys. Seeming kind of shady. Let's bring up one more news video, and this is where the guest from Just the Tipsters podcast hops in. All right.
Since Bill and Peggy Stephenson were brutally murdered inside their Florence condo. And now a tip to Boone County detectives could bring their killer to justice. For years, detectives have known about a truck driver who may have talked with the couple. And a caller tipped off the sheriff's office that person was back in town for a family event recently. The truck driver was swabbed for DNA, and it's now being tested. And we spoke recently with Detective Coy Cox about what this tip means for his investigation.
What the hell does that mean? This was a year after what we just read. They said that the truck driver was in town for some kind of family gathering. They swabbed him, and they're waiting to hear back. Isn't that what they just said a year ago about a truck driver? Like, what are they talking about? Doesn't make sense.
We have guarded enthusiasm. This could be it. This could be the answer to solve the case. When the day comes where you can look at them and go, here's what we have found. Here's what we are going to court to try to prove to a judge or a jury. Yeah, that day I hope comes soon. But it'll be solved.
Now, Detective Cox has appeared on a true crime podcast to ask for tips that lead to the Stephenson's killer. It's called Just the Tipsters, and it's hosted by Northern Kentucky native Melissa Morgan. She doesn't have a background in law enforcement, just a passion for finding missing people and helping police solve crimes. And Melissa is home from California right now and was kind enough to stop by Good Morning Cincinnati. It's so good to see you in person, Melissa.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so tell me, you live in California now, but this case, the Stephenson murders, really hits home for you. Why is that?
It has hit home in every minute of the time I've been here. Everywhere I go, someone knew Bill and Peggy and only have the best things to say about them. And so many people are interested to make sure that this case does get solved.
So are you feeling pretty good about that tip that Detective Cox was talking about there?
I have to be honest, I feel great about all the tips, and there have been more than one and different directions, and I am just grateful that people hear the podcast or watch Local 12 and find something in them that makes them call.
Yeah, you had Detective Cox on again recently, close to that 10-year anniversary, and he talked about that DNA test. But has he gotten more tips since that second appearance with you?
He has.
Can you talk about any of that at all?
No.
No? Okay. Okay.
He is the definition of coy.
Yeah, well, and he's never called it a cold case. They've had this from day one, and they consider it an active investigation.
Old case, but never cold.
Yeah.
Never cold.
Gosh.
Yeah, I think there are tips that come in all the time and have for the last 10 years. But when there's a light shown on a case, more tips come in. People find something in themselves. You know, maybe that thing that I thought wasn't important is.
Right. Well, now you started your podcast after you personally got involved in a search for a missing man.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that and why it sparked this passion in you.
You never know what cases are going to hit you in a certain way. But this man was similar in age to me, and he just didn't, his wife came home from work and he wasn't there. And it took a day or so before they figured out there were circumstances that he didn't just walk away from his life. And that bothers me a lot when law enforcement is like, hey, maybe he's in Costa Rica. No, he's not. There's evidence that he definitely didn't walk away, and that we know that he's probably no longer with us, but his body is still missing. And I will say that after 3 years, there was an arrest made. And I'm going to take a tiny bit of credit for that. It's always law enforcement that does this, and it takes a village. But I did a little bit of stomping my feet, and the case was sort of looked at closer, and I'll be darned, now there's an arrest.
Wow. There are so many true crime podcasts.
There are.
Why do you think they're so popular?
I think it's something inherent in all of us. We all want to be armchair detectives. We all want to solve a mystery. We all think we know. Who hasn't watched a show and been like, well, I know that guy did it. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're not. So I think it's a good thing to keep our brain active. You know, even if it's something you don't do on the daily, you know, thinking about a case and thinking, I wonder if that could have happened, or it's amazing the perspective of different people, and that I think really can help law enforcement.
Are law enforcement officers and detectives and investigators, are they becoming more open to getting help from shows like yours?
Well, I'll tell you, Sheila, I feel very blessed, and I think the people in Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Indiana, you have great law enforcement here. But I'll tell you, it's not that way across the world or across this country. There's not gray. Your name, there's no gray.
Right.
It's black or white. Law enforcement are either, the minute you call, they're like, yes, I'll talk to you, I'll tell you anything you want, let's talk about it. Or
no, thanks.
you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
they don't. I can't get some law enforcement agencies to even acknowledge I exist.
Right.
So thank you guys so much for participating in the voting. So there was 20 votes. Thank you so much for. This is Just the Tipsters podcast. We're gonna watch her coming up soon, talking with Detective Coy about this case. Yeah, just thank you. I didn't feel like reading 15 pages of transcripts. You guys are lifesavers. So, yeah, this article was really, really good. This article is actually from 2020, so I didn't play it with the timeline like in order. But this is probably the best article that I saw. It's from Spectrum News 1. I don't know how credible they are, but let's see here. The Unforgotten, No Justice, Decade Later in Stephenson Murders. The lead detective on this case said it should not be considered a cold case and has remained active in their pursuit for justice for the Stephenson family all these years. It's not cold, it's old. You have to say it's old. It's 9.5 years. Most cases you would want to have been solved in 9.5 years. But the thing about it is, this case has been alive and breathing for 9.5 years, said Boone County Sheriff's Office Detective Coy Cox. The elderly couple lived their lives full of faith and with mission of spreading the gospel. It is that same faith, along with the reward money offered, that Cox is banking on to help solve their murders. Really? The faith. Anyway, God knows what happened at the scene. I believe that with all my heart, and God is in control, and in His time and with His plan, and if it's His will, it will be revealed, Cox said. No, if you have the DNA, go get him. Our job is just to keep doing the investigation, hitting the hammer, hitting the nail with the hammer, just keep driving. The self-described Christian investigator said that with conviction, sitting alongside a conference room at a sheriff's office in Burlington, Kentucky, with a binder full of case notes in front of him on the table. Cox has been on the case since day one, a case that started with him walking into a baffling crime scene more than 9 years ago. On Sunday, May 29, 2011, just after noon, a family member went to check on Bill and Peggy Stephenson after they did not show up for service at a Union Baptist church. While Peggy, the church organist, would miss occasionally because of fibromyalgia, she never skipped a Sunday to worship. They were very faithful about their church attendance. He was always at the church and always at the Truckers' Chapel on Sunday morning, so when he missed both, when he didn't go to the chapel and he didn't show up at the church, then they thought, man, there's something really weird about that. When the family member, who has not been publicly named, entered the couple's Ridge Edge Court condo in Florence, they uncovered a grisly scene. They were both stabbed and suffered blunt force trauma. Further, the suspected inflicted a post-mortem injury on at least one of them nearly 2 hours following their death. But from the beginning, he said, the crime scene yielded little evidence, and moreover, it appeared to be arranged. In quotes, deputies arrive at what was an unusual and complex crime scene. All of the crime scene was staged. Every room had something in it had been staged. The detective elaborated, you have the crime scene, and what would have been what played out as any conflict would have happened between the victims and the perpetrator or perpetrators. After the murders were accomplished, the perpetrator or perpetrators stayed in the crime scene or came back to the crime scene and changed everything. Every room in the house had things changed. There were things that were maybe on end tables or up on shelves that were changed, altered, moved, turned over, marked on, he said. There were items that seemed to have no significant meaning left in different rooms. Most of the items that were left at the scene appeared to be things that were probably there before in the residence. He explained further how he was able to determine that items were moved or altered following the murders. They're not going to come in and move those things before they control the victims, and the way they controlled the victims were to kill them. So then you add to that. We know the exact time of death from a medical device that was in one of the victims, and then we know from a postmortem injury that was to one of the victims. That injury occurred at least 2 hours after the body had already been murdered. He would not expound on the type of injury or exact time of death, but did say that the crime took place between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., and the postmortem injury and time frame gave the dogged detective a clue. The wounds tell us that they were at least 2 hours after, either that they came back or they came back. So either way, it shows that someone was in there after the murders and was very comfortable inside. That's going to take a considerable amount of time, much more than what an average murderer would choose to spend in a crime scene after they've committed the crime. They chose this. They chose this time. They chose this location. The time was really unusual. They would feel comfortable being in a condo with people above them and next door to them to do the things that played out in the condo. So that would kind of indicate that this is probably someone who is close to Bill and Peggy or family because they're comfortable inside, he surmised. The crime scene also included random items believed to have come from inside the home surrounding the bodies, appearing at first glance to be ritualistic in nature. However, after consulting with other law enforcement and the FBI, Cox said that they came to the conclusion that the items strewn about near the victims were not part of any sort of ritual. The baffling part, obviously, is what I've described, and I say, we don't have a crime scene. We have the scene that our perpetrators wanted us to find. So what they had the opportunity to do was stage things in the scene to make it look like different motives. If you could picture a scene that would pop in your mind if someone broke into a house to burglarize it, looking for items of value that they might take. Well, they created that appearance, but they left things of value. They just ransacked stuff and went through stuff. So you can only go so far down that trail to say this isn't truly a motive. But he said that they think they know the motive. However, it's not something he can share yet publicly. With new information flooding the tip line throughout the last 9+ years, they're still missing 2 crucial pieces of evidence, and they're hoping that someone out there can piece the puzzle together with a new tip. One thing you have in a lot of cases, especially with the cause of death, you have the instrument that was used to cause the deaths. We don't have that. That was taken from the scene, Cox said. But, he said, he does know what the murder weapon was based on the injuries. He does know what the murder weapon was based on the injuries. Probably an edged or bladed weapon. Or maybe not, because there was blunt force trauma too, we heard. And whoever committed these crimes not only arranged the scene to appear a certain way, but also cleaned up afterward. The other big thing that is missing in the actual crime scene. If you have a crime scene where no one has cleaned up and no one has altered, which both of those happen in this case, then you can look at different pieces of evidence from the actual crime scene that will help you know. Hey, the altercation happened here. There might be spatter. There's all kinds of stuff that you're going to have in a typical crime scene. What investigators can do at this point is look at what they do have and keep the information close to their vests. There are very few people on the face of this earth that know exactly what happened in that crime scene, or in that scene and what has happened. So that's why we have to guard that so close, because we don't have what you typically have in other homicide cases, which is the actual crime scene, which will tell you a lot about the crime. Someday we'll sit down with that person, and if they choose to talk, and they're going to be able to validate what they did and what they were trying to do and why they were trying to do it. So, alright. See how much is left here. DNA and suspects. The biggest thing for Cox that stands out in this case, he said, was that both Bill and Peggy, who were 74 years old, had to die. If someone wanted to kill just Bill, he did something different every day, and he was by himself most of the time when he did it. He would travel to a mission in eastern Kentucky. He would go to Carrollton to help with another event that goes on down there on a weekly basis on Tuesdays. So there were all kinds of opportunities to kill Bill somewhere far away, where if he was murdered, someone would think, oh, must have been a robbery. And he continued, Peggy had some medical issues. If someone just wanted to kill Bill in the condo that night, they could have controlled her very easily. Number one, they could have just hit her over the head and rendered her unconscious. Or, if there were 2 of them, they could have just held her in the bed while they did what they did with Bill, and then they could have left if they just wanted to kill Bill. Same thing with Peggy. Bill would have been pretty easy to control, but they could have killed Peggy at any time while Bill was off doing his mission work every day. So whoever chose this, because of the location, because of the time, because of it being in a residence where people are above and next door, the one thing that is really, really obvious is that both Bill and Peggy had to die. Furthermore, whoever chose this location knew what they were doing, he said. The couple's residence was somewhat secluded, and within the community, he said, there is only one way in and one way out. That is something that typically a murderer wouldn't choose, because if they do have to flee in a hurry, they're going to be restricted to one direction. Investigators were able to uncover something from the scene that may one day put a face to the killer. In August 2012, the Kentucky State Police Crime Lab discovered an unidentified DNA profile found in multiple locations of the crime scene. With that, detectives have the genetic profile of the person responsible. But it's a complicated piece of evidence, he said. It has some complexity to it. Our DNA profile is not suitable for genealogy and or phenotyping at this time. Phenotyping is how investigators can predict the person's height, weight, hair color, etc. through a DNA sample. Genetic genealogy may forensically reveal a relative with a DNA profile. We hope that someday there will develop the technology to be able to do our complex profile, he said. The truck stop where Bill ministered to travelers had been and continues to be a hotbed for tips, opening the suspect pool to include truckers and travelers from across the country, some people just passing through the Northern Kentucky pit stop. In fact, over the years, Cox and his partner have traveled to several states to investigate leads. That opened up a lot of things, pretty complex, he said. We were physically going to locations in different states to interview people and collect DNA and fingerprints and alibis from truckers, and we're also calling law enforcement in almost every state in the country to collect those items. Those DNA samples collected from across state lines and neighboring jurisdictions have been compared to the DNA profile that they were able to develop from the crime scene. That DNA profile is currently in the Combined DNA Index System known as CODIS, a national law enforcement database that can compare and match DNA to other offenders throughout the country. We actually have a tip now, 9.5 years later, that just came in, about a truck driver, an individual who used to live in the area and then just, without explanation, moved away and no one has really heard from them again. Tips like that in the DNA profile give the investigators several suspects to look at, and keep in mind they continue to dig deeper in the case. We can't take anyone off the board because there are some issues that are just so complex, so we do vet people and we determine them to be a low priority so we can move on to others. And there are a few people who remain at the top of that list. Early on in the investigation, there was speculation that the couple's nephew, Charles Stevie Stephenson, may have had something to do with the double homicide. I can tell you that he is one of the people who has been on our list. Stevie was convicted of an unrelated homicide in Indiana and is currently behind bars serving that sentence. In 2012, Lee Jennings, 67, was found beaten to death in her Aurora, Indiana home just about a year after Stevenson couple was found murdered. It's a 30-minute drive away from the neighboring Kentucky police. Said. Jennings was found bludgeoned to death inside of her kitchen. The investigators said that they also looked closely at admitted serial killer Samuel Little, who in the past few years has confessed to murders spanning decades and the country, including in Ohio and Kentucky. Samuel Little was in Columbus, Ohio, and was arrested in April 2011, and he was released like 5 days later. So May 29th, 2011, Bill and Peggy were killed. He wasn't picked up again until June 2011 in Louisville, and he traveled on foot, hitchhiked. Well, if you draw a line, especially with Interstate 71, guess where he came through at some point in time? And it just so happens it's right in that magical window. So Cox says Samuel Little might be a suspect. They spent time looking at Little's other crimes, including murders that he admitted to committing in Cincinnati, about 20 minutes away, just on the other side of the Ohio River. His crimes were really different, and he was at the point that if you asked him about it, then he would tell you. While his timeline and travel seemed to line up with Bill and Peggy's slayings, Cox said that they do not believe that he's the culprit. However, they have not marked him off their suspect list, although he did move lower on the list. It's unclear from the evidence or lack thereof whether or not there is one perpetrator or multiple offenders. However, the DNA profile they recovered from the scene is derived from only one person. So there we have answers on that. Not mixed from one person. And that person, he said, could be anyone. All right. So let's go ahead and get this thing going. Sorry I couldn't see the chat while I was reading. I think I'm just going to link this to you guys, the case study on crime scene staging. It was really interesting, but I don't feel like reading anymore. We're going to go ahead and watch this podcast, Just the Tipsters, with Detective Coy on it. The title is Looks Like 10 Years is Too Long. Stephenson Murders Update with special guest Detective Coy Cox. So let's go ahead and play that.
From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tipsters with Melissa Morgan.
Here's until further notice.
Today with special guest Boone County, Kentucky Sheriff's Detective Coy Cox to discuss updates on the 10th anniversary of the Bill and Peggy Stephenson murder investigation. Remember, if you've got a tip for Melissa on anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, losing sleep for days because she's obsessed with this case, but mostly because her husband snores like a low-speed jackhammer, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. That is a very apt description.
Low-speed jackhammer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
That's my man.
Yeah.
That's my snoring man.
Oh, man.
You're, I always say if I were asleep, I wouldn't know that you're snoring, right? So
That would make sense.
Yeah. And you actually, I will be honest, I don't think you snored a lot last night. The night before, it was pretty intense. I think covered the case that they got in early on. It is
right. We've got good tipsters out there.
Yes, we have amazing people, amazing about the case of Alyssa Lamb. And I will tell you that if you haven't seen it, helping in ways that they can. And what they need now is help from you. They need help from the tipsters. You've already helped more than you know.
Just trying to skip it to a good part.
Which is a big deal because of where I'm from, and this case is so important. And something that Major Tom Sheben said that Michael Helmig said, Sheriff Helmig understands homicide makes a community acutely aware of trauma and loss from within. It's not an act. It's not an act that simply stays between the immediate parties involved. And no truer words have been said. And I know that Sergeant Tim Adams and his partner, Detective Coy Cox, have been working on this case from day one for over 10 years. And I know that Detective Cox has over 30 years in law enforcement. He's been a staff instructor, a SWAT officer, and the last 18 years or more have been with the Boone County Sheriff's Office. And he and Detective Adams were some of the first detectives on the Stephenson case, which is kind of rare. And you can hear more about the detective and a little bit more about this case in our episode 147. But some new information has come out, and we felt it was important to update the case. Here we are 10 years later. And I know that Detective Cox will never call it a cold case because it's never gone cold, and it's presently an unsolved case. And I know over the last 9 or 10 months, since we spoke with Detective Cox, I have gotten a plethora of odd information, emails, and tips that I passed on, and I can't imagine some of the ones that Detective Cox has gotten, and we're going to talk about those. Thank you for being here today, Detective Cox.
Thank you for having me. Again, I think it's awesome that you get this out and keep it fresh in people's minds. Again, you've said it's the 10th anniversary, and trust me, I've heard that from the sheriff and from the family members, and we are all acutely aware of that. And I think it's really important to keep it out there. To your point, in the last 9 to 10 months, we have received what we call 3 really viable pieces of information that had just kind of been dormant for all of this time, and people have called in as a result of the podcast and other media exposure. So thank you for having me, and thank you for getting it out there, and thank you for putting this together on the 10th anniversary.
So for those who are unfamiliar with the case, I'm not sure where you've been, and especially if you are in the tri-state area in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati or in Indiana. It is a very big case, and I will tell you that after more information has come out, people from all over have emailed me. I cannot imagine the type of information that Detective Cox gets. And at the end of this podcast, we will absolutely be giving you ways to get in touch with him, because as is always said, and I know that Sheriff Helmig said too, please, any information you think you have, let law enforcement know, and we'll give you all the ways to get in touch with them, because you don't know what that could do. You don't know what that piece of the puzzle could do. So an overview is that 10 years ago, May 29th of 2011, Detective Cox was working on a special project for the federal government, and he got a phone call, and he shows up at a condo in Oak Brook in Florence, Kentucky. And I'll let you go from there, because I'm sure in your many years in law enforcement, you've seen some real interesting stuff, but it sounds like this may be one of the most odd cases you've ever had.
Yes, and that is kind of putting it mildly, but on May 29th, we did get that call, and we arrived at the residence where Bill and Peggy Stephenson.
Okay, so it looks like we're here. Detective Coy is on the line, and we're going to listen to him for about 20-30 minutes, and then we're going to get out of here.
Lived, and the scene was quite different than any other scene that I've ever been on, and different than any scene that most had been on. The FBI has kind of labeled it as one of those 1% cases. So yes, it was very different. It was brutal. It was horrific, all of the things that you can imagine, but the things that kind of make it really complex is that the person or persons who were involved stayed in the crime scene for hours after the murders post-mortem, and had changed things in each and every room. So the scene that we had when we got there was the scene that they wanted us to find and to experience and try to interpret, and it was not the actual crime scene that had happened. So obviously you did have the bodies there.
Uh-oh.
Changed things in each and every room. So the scene that we had when we got there was the scene that they wanted us to find and to experience and try to interpret, and it was not the actual crime scene that had happened. So obviously you did have the bodies there, and you had some obvious means that were used to cause the death of both Bill and Peggy Stephenson.
So yeah, they made a note that they knew exactly what the murder weapon was based on the wounds. I don't know if that's what they're saying. Isn't it so strange? Like, imagine being a detective and going to a scene, seeing this crime scene, but it's not even the real crime scene. It's staged. You know, they're like setting you up to investigate something that's not even real. Yeah, I'm getting definite Robert Ives vibes listening to Detective Coy Cox. Otto, good to see you tonight, man. Good to see you.
But all of the other things that were at the scene were really just there to kind of confuse the detectives and all of those who would take part in the investigation over the last 10 years, which has included the FBI, Kentucky State Police, other detectives in the area, the VDOC Society. The list is long.
Yes.
And we have done our best to include any agency or entity that we believe could help solve the case, and that's where we are and how we feel about it.
Well,
I can tell you that we don't care who solves the case. We just care that someone solves the case. So if someone's out there and they know information, whether they're in law enforcement or outside of law enforcement, that can help us solve this case, we not only embrace that and want that, but we plead with you to help. This is a case that obviously all murders need to be solved, but this is one that has really kind of hit our community pretty hard over the last 10 years.
It definitely has, and I have gotten so many messages from people. I lived there for the first 27 years of my life, and I had moved when this case had happened, but I've gotten so many messages from all different ways of communication. People that are like, "Hey, this is still bothering me. Hey, this still is unsolved. Hey," and I'm like, "Yeah, I understand. This is something that I think is." When you said the FBI labeled it one of their 1% cases, that's pretty unprecedented. But it's one of the things I admire most about Sheriff Helmig and about your team with the Boone County Sheriff's Department is that you are open to all sort of crowdsourcing, whether it's media or other entities and agencies. It's amazing. Anything I would suggest, you're like, did it. I mean, I was like, oh, the VDOC Society. And you're like, did it, presented this case, still in touch with them. And I'm like, oh, private lab in Texas, got them on speed dial. There's absolutely nothing, I can say that you haven't already, looked into, but that doesn't mean, that's just me here. That doesn't mean that there isn't some piece of information that someone else has that they need to share. And I know that you're always open to that. You take information from every place and you don't judge it. You act on it. You're like, well, this may not be what I think it is or where I need to go, but I'm still going to look because you don't know where it's going to lead you. And you investigate everything until there's nothing left of it. You obliterate it. It's one of the things I admire most about you and your team. There's nothing I have said that you haven't thought of or done, which is kind of amazing. And you have some great people working on it. I know you're still in touch with people from VDOC, and I know you've investigated things like the Wiccan community, and was this a satanic act? And, is it family? Is it a neighbor? I mean, and two things in my mind that stood out that have to be so difficult for someone in law enforcement is someone like Bill Stephenson, who is so gregarious and open and outgoing and has such a wide circle. Not only the oldest of like 12 kids or something, he's, got his own children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews, and he operates a truckers' chapel so that, truckers are on the road, and if they can't go to their home church, have a place to go. That's a huge number of people going in and out, not just daily, but hourly. I mean, and then there's not much worse than having a family member who decides to be a jackass and kills someone else less than a year later. If there's anything to mess up an investigation and make it more difficult, it's a wide number of people to investigate and a family member who is a monster. So let's start with, where did you start? You started with let's start with his circle and work out.
Well,
So if anybody didn't know or is just tuning in, this couple, Bill and Peggy, it was a double murder. They got killed in their condo, and there was a lot of really strange signatures and staging, crime scene staging, crazy stuff left behind. And it came out that their nephew ended up killing a lady in Indiana that was in her late 60s, a year or two later. So everybody immediately thinks, it could be that guy, or it should be that guy. So that's what she was saying, if nobody knew about that.
The first thing you do, you want to see the scene. The scene will talk to you. Again, this one was different because we had to realize that, okay, so what things in the scene actually had to do with the murders and what had to do with just somebody creating a situation that they wanted to confuse us. So,
do you know how hard that would be? So they already mentioned that there was symbols and markings. There was stuff left behind that showed their feelings, in particular towards one of the victims. Like, crazy. They have to go through all of that. Everything in each room. They have to see what was staged and what was actually part of the crime scene. Just imagine what they must have left behind because they haven't released all of it. Man.
Obviously, you start looking at who called, who last talked to them, who did they do supper with last, what kind of social gatherings had they been to recently. So you start putting those things together, interviewing those folks, go from there. And with this case, that's what made it so difficult. Usually those, not usually, always those folks would be, oh yeah, I was with Bill and Peggy Thursday night and we had a great supper, and when we left, we'd already planned the next time, and I just love spending time with them. So that's kind of what you got in this case. And from top to bottom, everyone that we have interviewed since then, and especially at that time, they were just like, it was a great relationship. Bill and Peggy are awesome people. They're first ones to help. Sometimes even when you don't even know that they knew about a situation that might be going on in my life, they just, came alongside and helped us. And so that part was kind of difficult. So when we started processing the evidence, we had hopes to find things that would help us. It was a very clean scene that was that had been a very active scene with the crime, with 2 murders happening, each murder in different rooms. So you would kind of think, wow, you have a whole lot to process here as far as evidence-wise, and actually photographing was probably the most tedious thing that we did, because otherwise it was clean. There wasn't a lot of evidence left that could be processed in the way of fingerprints or DNA or shoe prints or those kind of things. So it was kind of limited. We sent things to the lab, and the one thing that we do have in the case that we hope will net us some, great things down the road is a DNA profile of an unknown person. And we believe that belongs to our killer or one of the participants in the scene.
That's something I can't wait to get to. Yeah, that's the newest piece of information that has come out. But
I want to know if they had any life insurance policies.
Back to their circle, their daughter Beth said they were just open and friendly with everyone and they've never met a stranger. So it had to be, difficult to go through this large, potential suspect pool, but also it had to be something you could vet quickly, because there had to be a very small number of people, if anyone, who would have some sort of problem with Bill and Peggy. They just, I just can't find any human being that knew them that had anything other than glowing things to say. I think I emailed you this last week. I got an email a few days ago from a guy I went to elementary school with. And he said, my daughter told me I needed to listen to your podcast. I went to church with Bill and Peggy, and they're the best people I've ever known. And I was like, this is amazing to me that there isn't, it's not like, well, they put up a good face, but they were, really evil behind the scenes. There isn't one person who says anything bad about them, just the most, and not flashy gracious. They're just gracious human beings. It's not like they were putting a big face out in public, like, look how good I am. As you mentioned, they would do things quietly with wanting no attention or praise. So it makes this case even more troubling and puzzling. And when
Oh, Lotus, you heard that they got away with up to $10,000. It's weird because the Detective Coy said that there was a lot of easy to fence items that they could have made money on that were left behind. I don't know what comes to mind, like jewelry or something, but yeah, it seems like they were trying to. I don't know. If it was up to $10K, I would say that's a little bit more than just ransacking the place. But
when you say things like the killer or killers want to leave a message, who was the message for?
Well, that's part of the question, I guess. Understanding the message would lead to some understanding of who the message was for. But
wow.
So at the end of the day, it is hard as a detective who has been on several murder scenes and also, collaborated with other homicide detectives and folks just who have analyzed scenes to look at this one and not say, don't get caught up in what you see. What is this murder all about, these murders? And at the end of the day, when all of the dust settles, there's one thing that stands out completely. Number one, someone chose this time of the day. And if you look at that, and what does that mean? So we know that it happened in the early AM hours on Sunday morning in the cover of darkness. So anyone who would come into that residence would know that at that time, in the early AM hours in the morning versus the early afternoon hours in PM, the AM hours, they're going to run into both Bill and Peggy in the residence.
Right.
The chance of that is almost 100%. Bill and Peggy, if they went out of town, they went together. If they did something other than Bill's ministries in the daytime, they were always together. So that means that they came there, they planned it at that time period, and that both Bill and Peggy had to die.
See, and they mentioned that the timing was really weird too, because they know the exact time because of her device. I don't know. I'm just, even what he's trying to get to say, even if both Bill and Peggy were to die, it would have been easier to get them alone if it was one person, because they were often separated when Bill was gone. I get what he's trying to say. Why did they both have to die? So he's pretty much saying there had to be two. There was a reason why they had to both go. And part of the staging was making it seem as if one of them was targeted, I'm thinking.
Both were murdered, and as a result, there's some things that if you are in law enforcement or probably watched enough crime shows, you realize that why would both people have to die? And I'll let your minds and your listeners' minds go there. But so that tells us a few things as investigators, and there's certainly a group that you would want to look at very close and vet all of that information and where that might lead you. So when you look at the crime scene, you really have to be careful not to get caught up in everything that was going on in there and trying to analyze what this means or what that means, even though we did that and we spent a lot of time doing that. And
See, because if it's staged and it's clearly staging you to something different, yeah, he's saying you check it out, but you can't get tunnel vision because that's exactly what the killer would want, staging that. I don't know, just like the rumors. Let's say that there is an initial K in the Delphi murders. Could it be just staged, just made to throw detectives off course? That's what really strange.
We have spoken with professionals in all of those expertise in those fields. So, but at the end of the day, that's the one most glaring thing, that someone chose that time of the day. They chose that night when both Bill and Peggy would be there, and that both Bill and Peggy had to die.
I appreciate you clarifying that, because I often wondered and hadn't asked if the date had any significance. If, a lot of times on a holiday weekend, and it was Memorial Day weekend 10 years ago, a lot of times on a holiday weekend, people are out of town, or they have events, or they're with other family members. And I wondered if the date had any significance to the person, and maybe not. It's just one of the things to look at. And it's interesting you mentioned, I wonder if your vision of what happened has changed looking back 10 years later, because, and you also mentioned people who watch, a lot of crime shows. I mean, all of us want to be armchair sleuths, and most of us are not good at it. And that's why there are people like you and Sergeant Adams and all of the other entities you named who work on cases like this. There's a fascinating article by this forensic psychologist named Catherine Ramsland, and it just came out this week. And she calls something WYSIATI, what you see is all there is. And that's what a lot of people tend to look at. And it's like, as pieces of information come out, and absolutely law enforcement need to keep certain things to themselves, because that would be a way to prove if someone says something, whether they were actually there or if it's a rumor they heard from, the cleaning crew. It's important to keep those things back. We get it. And so when those of us who are sitting back and looking at a terrible event like this and thinking, well, I know what happened, or I can figure out what happened, we can't. But it also doesn't mean we don't have the information that might help you and the people who actually know what's going on. That's what we're hoping for, is that someone within the sound of our voice comes forward with something they find inconsequential. And I know that's happened to me over the last 9 or 10 months. I've gotten pieces of information that I was like, well, no, why would that be important? But I send it right to you, because it's not my judgment call to say whether it's important or not. And it may be something that hey, I need to look at this. And so I just want to say, and I know we're going to say it again at the end, anything that you think may not be important, it may be huge. And something Sheriff Helmig said right after the murders, he said, you may have heard something. Someone may have said something disparaging about Bill and Peggy, like they got what they deserve. If someone hears something like that, I hope that they would, even if it's just someone they think's a crank, who's just talking out, out of the side of their mouth, that kind of thing could be so important. So when you saw this, when you saw this scene, did it take long to realize that that it had to be an outsider? Like, if there's two people, and it's obviously, I don't know the details of the scene, did it dawn on anyone, or did anyone think immediately, we need to make sure this isn't like a murder-suicide? It's absolutely an outsider. Like, were there any weapons left?
Okay, so a couple of things. The outsider, that was kind of a lane shift there. Well, I'm not going to make a lot of comments on whether it was an outsider, or I guess the contrast to that would be an insider. I'm not going to make too many comments on that. I am going to drop back to something that you mentioned before when you ask, is there any significance with the date? And my answer to that is, I don't believe there's any significance to the date, with it being Memorial Day weekend, that kind of thing. I do believe there is a strong significance today. In other words, to the day of the week. Let me explain. So Bill and Peggy did the exact same thing on Sundays every weekend of their life. Sometimes Peggy may not be able to go to church because of some medical issues that she had. But if she didn't have medical issues, they did the same thing. They were at church, they were at the chapel, then they were at church. So it's kind of, it just kind of jumps out at you that, okay, so did someone choose this particular day because they felt like, well, when they're not at church, someone from church or from the chapel is going to swing by and say, where's Bill? Because even though Peggy might not be able to come sometimes with her medical issues, it wasn't anything that was to the point to where Bill would have to stay home and actually take care of her or that kind of thing. So Bill would always show up.
So the
date,
date,
the
date may
really
not be,
for us.
yeah, the date may not be important, but the day of the week might be, because the
insinuating that the killer paid attention to the victim's schedule at the very least.
Person or persons wanted them found.
Correct. Wanted them to be found by someone else. And I'm not going to delve into that any further.
And quickly.
Even though you will try to get me to. But
yeah, and also in that article last year, they still said the family. They did say family member, I thought, though. They said the family member who discovered the body's been unnamed, undisclosed.
Then the other thing that I wanted to say is you had mentioned about, so when you started and there were things that you started looking at, all of the detectives involved, and there were a bunch, and a lot of people put in a lot of hard work. But so we're kind of tracking in the same lane that we were right from that weekend with our theories. And that's what is really important about Detective Adams, and he's really good about it, to keep me from getting tunnel vision and just keep going down that same lane. But we end up in that lane a lot, in the original lane, tracking some of the same things that we did early on in the case. So having done so and continuing to do so, that theory is actually gains a lot of, not a lot of physical evidence, but a lot of circumstantial evidence.
Man, kind of cryptic here when he's talking. Not sure I'm really following, but it just sucks to hear this, because this is over 10 years after. In here they are saying that they get brought down the same paths as they were the early days. All those statements making it seem like they knew who it was, and it's just a matter of time before we put your name on that warrant.
That keeps keeping us in that lane.
Right.
And so I just felt like from something you said before that I probably needed to clear that up and make that important. Now, it's important that for two reasons. It's important that we take every piece of information that we get and every call that we get to say, hey, you may want to take a look at this person, that we do that. Number one, because it may be that other person or other persons. And then secondly, because this is the 10th year anniversary, and this is one of the hardest things that you will ever do as a law enforcement officer when you are entrusted with murder cases, because no one deserves answers more than the family of victims.
Absolutely.
And the only thing that allows us to sleep at night is to know that we are doing everything that we can. Every piece of information we follow up on, we are hammering that nail. You've heard me say that before. You just keep hitting the nail. And that's the only way that we can look at the family and say, we're doing everything that we can. And to know that, for them to know that we mean that. And actually it's a blessing with Bill and Peggy's children, that they are Christians, and that certainly we know that this is in God's hands and in His timing. And as you spoke before and said, I just talked to someone the other day, and they were talking about they went to school with Bill and how, what a great person he is and stuff like that. Their testimony is still being heard 10 years after their death. I don't know that you can name too many people outside of someone like Billy Graham or someone on that level that you could say something like that about. And that's pretty remarkable. And it's a testament to their lives. And maybe that's why God hasn't given us the answers in the case yet. So that's kind of where we are. I know I got off on a tangent there, but I just
that's
felt like
exactly
that should be said.
it's exactly where I wanted to go, actually, if you want to know the truth. So perhaps you're, reading my mind. So one of the things that struck me last year when I was speaking with a few of the family members was something that their son Doug said. And he said, all we have left is our parents' legacy. And I know that it means a lot to them. And I know they still continue to do the work that Bill and Peggy did, the work behind the scenes that, some people know about, some people don't. But they did so much for many communities. Not only were they beloved in their, home area in Boone County, they took many donations down to Eastern Kentucky to, and now apparently there was I don't know if it's rain or a flood, but so this areas that have been hit really hard, and the Stephenson kids still continue their parents' work. So there's no better legacy than passing on to your kids and their kids your work. And it's, here, like you said, 10 years later, you can't find someone who has a bad word. But do you know what my favorite definition of coy is? It's the second definition, and it's you. It's a reluctance to give details, especially about something regarded as sensitive.
She loves the Coy Meister, Detective Coy. I was just seeing if there's any other, if he was getting into any more details here. We're probably going to leave.
Then we got a pretty good break. There was an event in that person's life that brought them back to Northern Kentucky, and we were able, my partner and I, Detective Adams, were able to meet with that individual, conduct an interview, and collect a DNA sample, which will be evaluated. It has already been sent to the Kentucky State Police Laboratory, and it will be evaluated there for comparison. So, and that's, I've said as much as I can say about that.
So, a year and 2 months later since the DNA has been sent. So they're talking about that suspect, the trucker guy that came into town for some kind of family event or something. This is my first time looking at this case, so I really didn't want to... the only thing that I ever had criticism on was them saying that they had everything, and it was just a moment of time before they put his name on the paper and arrest him. They've been saying the same stuff really for like 12 years, so I don't have any criticism, though. They sound like really, really great people. That was a good case, I think. Pretty interesting stuff. Probably going to get out of here. Let's go ahead. I'm going to read this daily reflection here. It's called Listen, Share, and Pray. When working with a man and his family, you should take care not to participate in their quarrels. You may spoil your chance of being helpful if you do. When trying to help a fellow alcoholic, I've given in to an impulse to give advice, and perhaps that's inevitable, but allowing others the right to be wrong reaps its own benefits. The best I can do, and it sounds easier than it is to put into practice, is to listen, share personal experience, and pray for others. All right, guys. I will see you soon. Tomorrow, probably. Oh, man. Not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for coming. I think I'm out of music again. All out, fresh out of music. Seriously, I think I'm out of music, guys. I'm just going to have to end it right there. I'll get some music on tap and I'll bring it back to you guys tomorrow. See you later.